Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Waiting Wisdom. Today I'm with Simon Gawesworth.
Captain,
It's a great pleasure to be here with you, Simon.
he's coming along.
Right by the riverbank in Scotland. Beautiful day. And
Beautiful.
very fittingly, you've brought salmon gear.
Well, we're on a salmon river,
Yeah.
so I thought this would be the right gear to bring.
It looks great.
And I was out the day before yesterday salmon fishing. There's a few about at the moment, but very few. River's so low,
Yeah. It's
just needs some rain. And so I bought some gear that I was using the other day.
Where should we start? The flies look colorful and beautiful. Very tiny ones, I see.
Yeah, this is my entire salmon box.
Yeah.
So these are my Icelandic flies.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you recognize those sizes. I don't think anybody in Scotland would ever fish salmon that small. More like these doubles.
Yep.
They still like to fish the treble hooks over here, put in these like size 10s. Some of the slightly bigger ones early in the spring.
Yeah.
And then my tube fly box, which is the same size,
Yeah.
full of tubes, is packed away in my suitcase ready for my trip on Sunday to Canada.
Yeah.
So I couldn't bring that one. And that's what I've been fishing mostly.
Tubes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the tubes.
When would you go for a tube compared to like a traditional?
Water temperature, generally. I still work in the old scale of Fahrenheits. And to me, a good guideline is 48 is a magic number. My dad taught that. All the old books would talk about this 48 degrees. And then above 48, floating lines and smaller classic flies. 48 and cooler, 42 to 48, intermediates and slow sinkers and bigger tubes. And then below 42, full sinking and just the heavy big tubes, swung slow.
And has that sort of proven true throughout all your career, or have you seen any changes in the recent year?
I think if you were to analyze the statistics, there's always the anomalies, right? That 60-degree water, 65-degree water, put on a big tube and you catch a salmon. But I think the anomalies could be the fact that so many anglers adhere to those rules that 1% of the big flies fished in summer. But then there's the collie dog, in the sunray shadows. Those are long flies, and they're fished in summer fast, aggressively. So those are anomalies. But generally speaking, this time of year, most of the gillies you'd take, like on the river the other day at Ben Kilby, they were saying you want these like 10s and 12s,
Okay.
little doubles. Don't want to fish a big fly. But then I put on a sunray shadow, and I did get a pull and a swirl and nothing came back.
Yeah.
So, and you're going to be prepared.
What's your take, for example, on colors, apart from size and dressing?
That's a really good question. There's certain flies that you have faith in, and on certain rivers, like the Arndilly Fancy, that's a fantastic spey fly. I always start with that fly on the spey if I'm fishing a regular hook, not a tube fly. For whatever reason, I don't know, just kind of confidence. And then you've got cascades and you've got kind of alley shrimps and those little shrimpy double patterns that seem to work well on the spey. And then, of course, the collie dogs and sunray shadows seem to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Every year when you get a fish that's jumping around, not really, interested in taking a fly, and you can strip a collie and excite it and make it attack. I don't really have a guideline. Usually my guideline is, okay, Gilly, what do you like here? And one of the nice things about, not nice things, but one of the differences between gillies and guides, gillies are not afraid to pick a fly from your box. And if you go fishing with guides, everything you should, that'll not work at all. You need one of these things. And it's like, that difference is, like, I've got nothing that's going to work here, but gillies tend to pick a fly from your box. So my first question is always going to be to the gilly. What do you like?
Yeah.
Sometimes they like something I've got and sometimes they don't.
Yeah. I always find it interesting, for example, also with the sunray, right? It's a hugely popular fly in Norway. And I always ask myself the question, is that sort of the chicken and the egg? So is the sunray so popular and catches so many fish because so many people fish it, or the other way around, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that I find interesting is that, for example, in Canada, from what I know, people, use a hitch fly much more often. Whereas in Norway, when I fished there, basically nobody was ever hitching. And I sometimes ask myself, it's an Atlantic salmon in a somewhat similar environment. Why wouldn't that work?
I have the same question.
Exactly. To your point, I mean, in Ireland where I fished, collie dogs, very, very popular, very successful. collie dogs, not too much around in Norway, I would say, right? Everybody would always go for a sunray shadow, smaller, a little more blue, a little more black, but in general, sunray shadow I felt like was the go-to fly in
I don't know, because I mean, like here, in the Scottish rivers, like the Tay, you would probably never, the gilly would laugh if you tried to skate a hitch tube
yeah,
or wake a dry fly or dead drift a dry fly. Like in Canada, where I'm going, you can fish a lot of upstream dead drifted dry flies, and then they'll just come down and eat these big dry flies. How cool is that?
yeah.
Clear water, so you see the fish. So I'm looking forward to doing some of that. But I think here, as I said, if you had a put a dry fly and went upstream dry fly fishing here, the gillies would look at you like you had three heads and wouldn't allow you to fish anything. But again, could it be chicken leg? Because everybody fishes a
Yeah.
alley shrimp or a sunray shadow or whatever the flavor of the day is.
Let's maybe continue with the leader you use.
Hmm. Um, I think there's rules of thumb, right? In low water like this, and we are really low, where the other day it was 1 inch on the gauge, nothing. Clear water, warm temperatures, fish are less inclined to be aggressive in taking. They're not running, they're laid up, and they just seem to be less easy to catch. And in those conditions, thinner, lighter, longer are the rules of thumb. 12 pound, you know, is kind of the leader size I'd be fishing now. And then maybe 10 pound. I have some 10 pound leaders. I got 8 pound leader material somewhere as well, just in case the fish don't like it if the leader's a little bit thick.
Yeah,
And it also boils down to your fly.
yeah.
When you've got a tiny little fly on a stiff 12 pound leader, there's no action on that fly. So a good rule of thumb, those smaller flies need thinner materials to get some movement.
Hmm. And then these are all 9 feet though.
These are 9. I mean, I have some 12s with me again. They're packed for Canada, and I have some 15s. I have some 6-footers if I'm fishing a heavy brass tube fly. Yeah, I'd never fish it on on a 9-foot leader. It'd be on a short leader. And I like to, excuse me, live by a rule of thumb is that the bigger the fly, the shorter the leader. I'm sure you do the same. And anybody who's done a lot of casting
Yeah.
has that same ethos, is that the mass of this fly line can't have a long, thin bit in between the heavy fly and the heavy fly line because it can't cast. So big flies, short 6-foot, 4-foot leaders, smaller flies, 9-foot, 12-foot leaders, maybe 12, 15-foot leaders, super low water, sunshine.
Yeah.
Lots of lengths. And you can just add tippet to it with a tippet ring or
Yeah.
just a surgeon knot.
And then is that a Scandi Versatip?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah. It's it's a system I think very popular in Europe. Steelhead anglers aren't so much into that versatip in the Americas. Salmon anglers definitely, certainly Atlantic salmon anglers. And it's just an easy system. You have your reel
Hmm.
with your head on and your body system, and you have your wallet with your floating tips and your intermediate, your sinking and your fast sinking. And as you know, conditions change. Wind gets up, or you go from a slow pool like this where you're skating something and you're fishing a fast run and you need a bit more depth. Well, excuse me, didn't just change the depth. I think it's just a really simple, versatile system.
And when you say steelhead fishermen don't like it as much, why is that?
The number one is that the steelhead flies you can see on this side,
Yeah.
they're bigger, gaudier, have a lot more weight.
Yep.
They're much heavier fly. These tips are tapered, so the front end of these tips are very light in weight. So you tend to fish with a steelhead angler, what's called a mow tip. Sure you've come across
Yep.
them. Or a T14 or T17 tip. Tips that have a lot more weight. And the heavy tips can cast a heavy fly. So it's not so much the lack of changing of tip they don't like. It's just that these tips are designed for more presentation style fishing, more Atlantic salmon. And steelhead, king salmon, more winter fishing, bigger, heavier flies need more aggressive tips.
Yeah.
So the system is more set up for that, with those big flies.
Yeah, makes sense. And then we touched upon the fly line. Do you just have a shooting line behind that?
Not this one. So here, you can have the two systems, right? You can have, as you know, the shooting line and the
Yep.
head, and independently, and that way you can change your heads, which is a good system if you are going to switch from a Skagit to a Scandi or a floating to a hover head. That's a great system for that. But I'm not a fan so much of the loops going out, and
Yeah.
these are the integrated heads.
Nah, I prefer those as well.
Do you prefer those?
Especially with the long rods, like you're saying, right? If you have
Yeah,
the line in close, you constantly hear it ding against the.
yeah, it's so
Yeah.
frustrating. You strip it in and try and cast it. So yeah, if you're familiar with these, level running line,
Uh-huh.
short back taper, straight onto a head. No connections, no noise, no knots. And I hate the knots when you hook a fish and the knots are in the rod reel. If your rod's got any height to it, they feel like they can catch. You've got to drop that rod really low to get them to go through cleanly. That takes away the shock absorption of a rod.
Yeah.
Just don't like that system. And again, it's kind of a foreign concept in the US. The US anglers generally want the integrated heads in their trout fishing
Yeah.
and the interchangeable heads in their salmon and steelhead fishing. But in the UK and Europe, more anglers like the excuse me, integrated system where you don't have any loops and you just buy 2 or 3 reels
Yep.
and you just change the reel out as the conditions change if you need a hover or a faster sinking head.
Yeah. What's your take on the amount of backing you should use in salmon fishing?
On these bigger reels, you need enough backing to fill them out. I usually have 200 yards of about 30-pound backing. I think that's a good metric to have. Maybe 150 yards on the 5, 6, 7 weights, kind of your summer grills rods. Your steelhead rods, sea trout rods, they would have probably 150 yards, maybe a little bit lighter backing because you're fishing more of a 7 weight or something like that. But on these bigger rods, you'll fill up the capacity. And you're fishing a big rod, the river could be higher, there could be more current, the fish can go a lot further downstream,
Yeah.
be more aggressive.
Yeah.
So you need a bit more backing.
Uh-huh.
You just don't want that day to come when you run out of backing
Yeah.
and go, why? Why did I save 5 pounds and 50 yards of backing and lose the fish of my lifetime?
True.
Just so I can have a story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what size reel is this one?
This one is, this is an 8, 9, 10. It's, so on my 9-weight rod.
Unknown at first sight for an 8, 9, 10, but
Well, yeah. So what's interesting with Sage is their spey reels are labeled to match and balance the spey rod.
Uh-huh.
And if you don't get it's a funny game, and I pity the novice coming into this confusing world because, as you know, on this rod you'd normally get a 10, 11, 12 saltwater reel.
Yeah.
For this size rod. That would be the right size reel. And equally, if you bought a Sage saltwater reel, excuse me, then you'd get the 10, 11, 12. But when they built this series of spey-specific reels, they wanted to make sure you have a 9-weight rod and a 9-weight line and a 9-weight reel. And it, mentally it works.
Yeah.
But if you got the 9-weight saltwater reel, it would be tiny and wouldn't have the capacity and wouldn't have the balance, the weight to balance it to make it cast nicely.
Yep.
So you have to know, are you getting a spey reel or a saltwater reel?
Yeah.
So again, excuse me, confusing world.
Yeah. And this is a 9-weight 14.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a new rod, say 2 years ago. Came out with the Spey R8. It's a 6-piece. Sage don't tend to make a lot of travel rods. They make a few select ones, and then this year they really, when they came out with this, they really focused on the European market. Rod designer came over here, spent a couple of weeks, and I was lucky enough to travel with them on the Tay, on the Tweed, on the Spey, on the D, talking to gillies, trying to get out what is the ideal salmon rod. And everyone said it's got to be a 6-piece. And they tweaked and tuned the action so it was a nice European style fast action, not that slower middle flexing steelhead action that a lot of Americans like.
Yeah.
I don't like casting them. So this one is one of those really just cannons that just launch off the tip. I mean, it's a typical European style rod.
Yeah.
6 pieces.
I have to say I'm a fan that they are building more 6 pieces now. I think it just makes traveling easy. I remember my first days in Norway, you had this big rod case, 3-piece rods. I mean, I still think they're nice, but in terms of ease of traveling, the 6 piece is definitely easier way to
Well,
go.
it is, and these days, the fisheries have opened up. Back in the 50s and 60s, people never went abroad to fish, right? So you'd fish your home rivers, and we were talking earlier about Hugh Focus and Arthur Oglesby,
Yeah.
and as you probably read in Focus's book, he would superglue his rod ferrules together so they didn't fly apart. And then on the back of his fishing hut, he would build a 15-foot or 16-foot rod vault and keep these superglued rods out. You never want these rods to come apart, so you superglue them together.
Yeah.
Because people didn't travel so much in those days.
Yeah.
And then I guess when he would drive up to the Spey and to Scotland to fish, he would have his broken down sections. But for his home rivers, he was a fan of supergluing his rods together.
Yeah.
And now, it's the technology these days. In the old days when you had spigot ferrules, those spigot ferrules would have these dead spots.
Yeah.
And they definitely affected the action.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, these rolled over ferrules don't affect it at all. You can look at an incredibly slow motion video of these rods flexing, and you can't tell where the ferrule is.
Yeah.
Because they are so well designed these days. But in the old days, you'd always see these just completely straight spots and no flex, which obviously defects the action. So technology, nothing wrong with them. 6-piece rods. And again, as you say, for traveling, you can stick them in the overhead bins if they allow you these days.
And 14 feet, is that sort of your go-to length for rivers like over here in Scotland, the bigger rivers?
April onwards. Yeah. February, March, rivers are big.
Yeah.
You can't wade out far. You need a monster cast. And
Yeah.
so it's still going to be 15s and
Okay.
16s.
Nice.
Bump them up to a 10 weight.
Yeah.
Probably in those cases, chuck it onto a mono shooting line rather than integrated. Then just get an extra 20 meters of cast because you're using a thinner running line.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Simon, I think we've covered all the essentials of the salmon setup. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and all the insights. And
Yeah. Is it similar to yours? I mean, what would you do differently, for example?
it's very similar to what I used mostly in Norway, for example, at least.
Yeah.
I always felt
Northern,
like
I think.
on the bigger rivers, 14 feet, 15 feet, that's sort of the go-to Scandi Versatip. I used them a lot. I like them a lot. And in terms of flies, like I was saying over there, it's mostly sunray shadows.
Yeah.
Smaller ones, bigger ones. Then depending if you target sea trout, you might go for a smaller fly. But in general, I would say it's a setup that I would use just like that. And I like it. I mean, I have to say, I mean, most of my fishing nowadays is trout fishing probably, or single hand fishing, 5, 6, 7 weight.
Yeah.
And I like the big sticks. I just, even if you don't catch a fish, I enjoy casting a double-handed rod so much that it's just something special the 1 or 2 weeks a year I get to do it. But I think it's great fun.
They jokingly say that the reason spey casting was invented in Scotland is because there's no fish to catch. So they had to have some kind of entertainment. And there's no doubt that casting the two-handed rods, particularly if you're spey casting,
Yeah.
I think it's a little different if you're just overhead casting from a boat. But if you're wading at spey casting, I think the element of satisfaction in doing good spey casts
Yeah.
outweighs the need to catch a fish to have an enjoyable day. We still want one,
Yeah.
but you don't need one because you're having an enjoy. I mean, imagine a day fishing out in a trout reservoir with a sinking line and you're throwing it out and stripping, getting you need the interaction of fish.
No, I agree. And I also enjoy, like I said to you before, a good swing in a fast current, a big
Yep.
rod laid out, fish like a long swing. That's just enjoyable. To me,
Yeah.
it's more like you're saying than, being on a boat and stripping in. I mean, you can still catch a great fish, no
Yeah.
question. But in terms of enjoyment of the technique and the fishing without even catching a fish, that's definitely high up there.
Well, I think, and again, you got to get to the core, in my opinion, when you're talking to people, and people, I do teach an awful lot of people various forms of fly fishing, and I always try and find out, so what are you here for? Why do you want to go fishing? Or why do you want to learn fishing, particularly if they're beginners? And a lot of the people will say, oh, I just want to go out trout fishing and catch some fish for dinner. And so you know that their reason for going is to catch fish. And then some people will be just to be outside. And when you look at this, I mean, look at how beautiful a day it is today. You can be outside just casting. And the other day when I was with my couple of American friends fishing on the Tay here, I guess we were on the beat for 6 or 7 hours, and I bet we didn't fish more than 3. Because we would sit down and just chat and pour a coffee and just watch the water and
Yeah.
sit on the bank and just chat away and just to absorb and watch each other cast. And,
Yeah.
it's that whole page. But again, some people just want to catch fish.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was the same for me. The last couple of days, I fished with my brother-in-law on the test, and I, just like you said, enjoy so much to watch the river and see rising fish. Make
Yeah.
a plan on how to cast for them, and obviously catching a fish is great, but I think there's much more to it. like you're saying, especially if you're fishing with friends. I enjoy as much if a friend of mine catches a fish than I do, because
Right.
I think it's the whole process and trying to help someone into a fish is just as enjoyable as catching one yourself.
Well, I think that's the sign of the true angler at heart, is that you don't have to catch the fish,
Yeah.
right? Is that you get as much satisfaction. One of the greatest things about guiding or gillying or teaching is that you feel like you contributed to their success,
Yeah.
right? And so that's a good feeling.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm equally happy. I would have loved it if my friends had caught a salmon, and one of them did get a grab, like I got a grab. So we had some kind of action. And then, funny enough, they've gone up to Scotland to fish with Ian. Right, so they're up there today with Ian. So
Yeah, if the water wasn't so low, it would be great to go and cast a fly, but maybe we'll get to do that next time.
well, I mean, we can still do it, but when we kind of sorted this out as a location, because as you know, our first idea was talking Austrada, and then we
Yeah.
kind of, oh no, we need to be on the water for this.
Yeah.
And when I phoned up the estate here to see if we can get on this beautiful McClure beat, the fishing had already been booked, so
Yeah.
we couldn't get on.
Yeah.
Not because of the water height,
Yeah.
just because it'd been booked. But next time,
Next time.
we'll plan in advance and get some dates booked, and we'll just go up there and go up to that top pool where there's a lovely run. And
Looks great.
I know,
Okay. Thanks, Simon.
really enjoyed it. Yeah, very good fun, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your stay in Scotland.